I'm Gretchen Hirsch, and I'm so excited to be showing you an update on the circle skirt segment that I did on the very first episode of It's So Easy. So now, for the 10th season, I have updated this design with a really fun vintage-inspired variation. So I've had a picture of this vintage dress in my inspiration board for a while now. And it's sort of deceptively simple. It's two different scales of gingham, one for the collar and for this sash that gets threaded through buttonholes on the skirt. And then the dress is in a larger scale gingham. So I've just taken a circle skirt and added a bodice that I like to it. And so what I'm gonna be showing you today is how to create this really cool threaded sash effect. So let's come over to the table. And the first thing you want to do is to have made your circle skirt. So there are a lot of great tutorials online, and there will also be instructions online for all of this. So it's a lot of measurements, but just kind of, you're just going to get the idea now. So what we're going to be doing is creating these buttonholes that kind of form this arc, and then we thread the sash through it. So after you've made your circle skirt, you've sewn your side seams and your center back seam if you have one. Now we're going to create our the sash and the bow. So it's really two sashes. One gets threaded through the skirt and the other becomes a bow that gets tied and tacked on at the hip. So what you're going to want to do is in your smaller scale gingham, you are going to create wide bias strips. So on the true bias, you're going to be cutting 12.5 inches wide and as long as you can get them. So I used 45-inch wide fabric, and this was the longest piece I could get out of it. You can see there's the selvage on either end. So you're gonna need two of those, one for the bow, one for the sash. So the first thing you'll do is fold these right sides together. And for the sash, you're gonna sew along one edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then you're going to turn it right side out through the ends and press it flat. For the bow, you're going to do something a little bit different. You're going to want to create an angled cut on the end, both ends, and then you're going to sew the short ends to the middle and leave yourself a good 5 or 6 inches to turn the bow right side out. Turn out those corners and press it flat. So what that is going to leave you with is two different pieces. This one will become my sash because the ends are open. And this second one will become my bow because you can see I've finished the ends. Okay, so now that you have those, you're just going to grab the sash one and you're going to take your circle skirt and lay it out flat. This can be a little tricky because circle skirts are so big. So you can just get it on, you can have it folded in 2 layers, front and back. So I have it doubled here. So I'm looking at the front right now. So I'm gonna kind of sketch out, sort of mock up the shape of this curved sash. So it's going to start on the right side of your body, so I'm looking at the left side, about 8 inches above the hem. We're gonna start the shape of this sash. And this is kind of the trickiest part because you need to play around with it a little bit, and it's also the most creative part. You could do a lot of different things with this. But what I was trying to do was really recreate this vintage dress, which kind of started over here at the hem, and then it curved up really quickly straight across to the left hip. So it would create the effect of going through the skirt and then being tied in a bow, but we know that the bow is a separate piece. Okay, so what you're going to do is lay it out and kind of just play around with it. You want to kind of be aware of where your center front on your skirt is and then end it up around the hip. Okay, so once you're happy with your sash placement, you're going to mark your buttonholes. So what I would recommend is using one of these erasable pens. So there are some of the pens that have like the blue on one side that you can wash out and the purple on the other that disappear with 24 hours usually. So that's a good place to start because you really need something that's going to show up very clearly. So you're going to start, like I said, about 8 inches above the hem. Your first buttonhole is going to be a single buttonhole, and then the buttonholes are going to be in pairs. Again, don't worry if you're not getting all of this right now, you can always refer back to the instructions. Single buttonhole, then several sets of pairs, and then on the left hip, one final single buttonhole. Okay, so let's just start by marking one single buttonhole and one pair. So what I would recommend, we're going to be making 2-inch long buttonholes. So about 3 inches from the side seam. I am going to be looking at the placement and the angle of my sash, and I'm going to make a mark on either side of where I want the sash to be positioned. So that'll be my first buttonhole marking. Now let's go about 4 or 5 inches over this way, and we're going to make the first set of paired buttonholes. Okay, so I'm going to make one right here, another buttonhole. I'm marking on the top and the bottom, just making a little dot for now. And then about 1.5 inches over, I'm making another set of dots. Okay, so you're going to go along the entire sash that you've placed in this way, marking buttonholes. Now what I'm going to do is actually draw lines for the buttonholes. So what you're going to want to do is, centered between your 2 little dots that you made for your buttonhole, you are going to draw a line. I love using these clear gridded rulers for this purpose. Draw a line like that, and then on each end give yourself a little horizontal mark like that. So it's like an uppercase I. I'm going to do the same thing with this little set right here. There's my second buttonhole. And then the one that is going to be paired with this one. If you've ever seen beading lace, that's lace that has little holes to thread a ribbon through, this is the same idea. So we're going to have one for the sash, one buttonhole for the sash to come out of, and then it's going to need to kind of thread in and out these pairs of buttonholes. So now that I've marked those first 3 buttonholes, let's go, I'll do a little demo of how you would make a long buttonhole like this. So on this machine, I am going to be in my buttonhole setting, and I'm going to make sure that I am on a manual buttonhole, which lets me sew each step of the buttonhole separately, and it lets me control the length of the buttonhole itself. Okay, so I'm going to start at the top. I would always recommend making a test on this. I'm using white thread because it blends in really nicely with the gingham, but I would recommend using whatever blends the best with your fabric. Okay, I'm starting at the top, and you want to know which way your machine is going to start going, towards you or away from you, because that's important. Okay, so I'm going to start by sewing this side of the buttonhole. You've probably never sewn a buttonhole this big before. It feels really weird. Okay, now I'm at the end. You have to really watch where your marks are. So now I need to press the next step on the buttonhole. If you have an old machine, it might just be a knob that you have to turn. That's what mine at home is. Okay, now I'm going to do the second long side of the buttonhole. So you have to be very careful that you're ending where you started. It can be easy to overshoot this and keep stitching. So I'm just kind of slowing down here to make sure I don't go too far. Okay, I see my mark there. All right, and now I'm going to press the final step, which is that bar tack on the end. All right, now I'm gonna do my thread cutter. All right, so, and obviously I would continue up the skirt making many 2-inch long buttonholes. Okay, so I'm gonna cut this one open. You can use a seam ripper to get it started. And then with a buttonhole this long, I would recommend just cutting it with a little sharp pair of scissors. And there you have a nice long buttonhole. So I have a skirt here that I have created all the buttonholes that I need, and I'm going to show you how to thread the sash through it. So this is the one with the open ends. I'm going to come up through the first single buttonhole. And now you just keep threading it in and out through these buttonholes. And the most fun part of this project is kind of arranging your sash, because you can kind of zhuzh it up a little bit so it looks nice and pleated, or you can fold the sash in half so it looks just sort of like a little ribbon. Then when you get to the top here, your sash is going to go in, and you're going to secure the sash on either end. You can do some top stitching on the buttonhole to secure it. Final thing to do is to make a bow, and that's a lot easier than it sounds, because you're probably going to be tying this a few times before you're happy with your bow. So give yourself a little time to get this right, but you just want to style it really nicely and get it nice and pretty, and then that bow gets tacked on the hip. So this is sort of creating an illusion that you have a ribbon that then becomes this beautiful bow on the hip. So I hope you have enjoyed this really fun and easy vintage-inspired circle skirt update.